D3 group selections, let's go! Someone asked me recently, do you have a good example of a D3 grouped selection? I can never remember how to do the pattern, and I don't do it often enough. For example, an SVG group for each data element that has, say, a bar and a label within it. Appending is easy. Joining is where it gets a bit more gnarly. I have opinions about how this can be done. I'd like to start with this bar chart and then add number labels to the top of each bar as an example of this D3 grouped selection. I'll fork this viz and I'll call it D3 grouped selections. And then if we take a look in the code, here's the part that renders the bars. Now the change we want to make is instead of rendering one rect element per datum, we want to render one group element per datum. And then within each of those group elements, we have a rect and then a text element for the label. And by the way, D3 axes kind of do this exact thing. See how each tick is actually a group element with a line and a text inside of it. We can use the same kind of a technique where we set the transform to translate on the group element, which will move everything inside the group element around. Okay, so instead of selecting each rect.mark, I will select g.mark and then join them to g elements. And for this pattern, I like to break out of the .join shorthand and instead define the enter, update, and exit parts separately. So we can say enter is a function, update is also a function, and exit by default just removes, and that's the behavior we want. So for enter, this should ultimately return the enter selection, or rather, no, the appended group element. An update should just return update, and I think that's what the default behavior is. Let me see if I can just pass a function definition for enter here and see if it works. And I would like to simplify this to use the implicit return pattern. That way we can use .call to invoke a function on, I guess I'll call it selection, which is our group element. And this is where we can say selection.append rect, and then selection.append text. And that's it for enter. Enter is what I like to think of as just scaffolding out the structure. And while you could put more stuff in the enter selection, like styles, I like to keep it outside of it so that we can still work with hot reloading code. Oh, but one thing that can go in there is setting the mark class. Yeah. Okay, so on enter, we append a group element, we set the class to be mark, so it gets picked up by the select all on the next time around. And then we use .call to essentially have a side effect whenever we enter new elements, which is we append a rect and we append a text element. Now, all of these .attr's are supposed to apply to this rect. And we're also going to want to set some attributes on the text element as well. So out here, we can use .call, and then we can say selection.select rect. And this is not select all, it's just select, but it's being applied on a selection with multiple group elements. So when you actually call selection.select rect on a selection that contains a bunch of group elements, that will return a selection that contains a bunch of rect elements. And then on those rect elements, we can set all of these attributes. And I think that should run. Yeah, that works. Now let's put some text in those text elements. In addition to selection.select rect, we can say selection.select text.attr. And here we essentially want the same value as we're using to drive the Y scale, namely the population. So I'll take this Y definition as a template and then just not pass it through the Y scale. And we're probably going to want a number formatter, but this should work initially. Oh, but we don't want to actually set an attribute. We want to set the text content of the text node. Let's see if this works. I don't see anything showing up here. Let's inspect the DOM. The text elements are there, but they're not at the right spot. Ah, yes, because we kept the X and Y definition on the rectangle. Let's elevate that out to the level of the group element using transform translate, so that the text will move around. So yeah, instead of X and Y going here, we can set those on the group element, but this won't work as is because we need to specify the transform to be, the AI did a great job of this, translate by an X value of this, X scale, X value of D, and then a Y value of Y scale, Y value of D. Okay, and now the text elements actually show up in the right spot. Imagine that. All right, this is the main thing. From here on out, it's just styling. Okay, for the text, we can set the font family to be sans serif. Now the font looks a little different, maybe a little cleaner. And I would like to apply a number format. I'll call it format bar label. And this can be a function that we define up top here based on format imported from D3. We'll see what the AI comes up with. Yeah, format.2s. That gives us labels like 1.4m or 340k. And if we add 3, it gives us another significant digit. Yeah, that seems pretty readable in terms of the number format. Now a little more styling to just position the text. It's kind of overlapping with the bars. And because these are inside of transformed group elements, we can actually use X and Y for just the inner offset that we want. So Y could be something like 10, which will push it down, or minus 10, which will push it up. And we can use the interactive widgets to get it to just the right spot. And I kind of want to center these on the bars as well. And we can do that by setting X to be the width of the bars divided by 2. So x.bandwidth divided by 2. So that puts them at the right spot. Now we need the text alignment property to align it to the middle. And I believe that's text anchor. Now we can set that to middle, and that will align them properly. Okay, great. And I don't really like how these are outside of that gray rectangle. So I might just get rid of that inner rectangle. It doesn't really add anything. It was more for teaching the concept earlier of the inner rectangle. And they seem a little close to the bars. Let me just pull them up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. That's how you can do D3 grouped selections. To recap the whole pattern in a nutshell, we start with this data join here, where we do, select all g.mark.data.join, and this is where we use the long form of .join by passing a function that deals with the enter part of the update pattern. And normally, what it does internally, it just says enter.append g, and then we can give it a class of mark. But what we're doing special here is we are appending a rect element and a text element to each of these group elements. And it might be helpful just to take a look at the DOM real quick, just to see that we do in fact have G elements that have a rect and a text element inside of them. And this is true for all of our marks. And then we set the transform attribute to translate by the scaled x and y values. This will move around the group element and everything inside of it. And then we use .call with the selection, which is all those group elements. And then we use selection.select rect, which gives us a selection that just contains these inner rectangles. And then we can set whatever attributes on those that we want to. And this pattern, by the way, supports hot reloading. Like, I could change something in here, and it should hot reload and update. And we could use the interactive widgets. This is because it's outside of the enter selection. I mean, we could, in theory, put all these attributes in here, but then it wouldn't work with hot reloading. Although it would work in general, but it wouldn't, like if any of these were to change over time, you wouldn't catch the updates. So that's why I like to put all the sort of core logic outside of this enter selection. And then the same goes for text. We can select all the text elements and then apply some attributes and set the text content to be the formatted number label. Thanks for watching. Take care.